are people seeing me speaking? Yes, okay, good. Well, I want to thank the library for having me back in this way. I'm grateful to still be able to connect with you all, and it's really wonderful that the library has been able to still create some programming to keep us all connected and learning in this time. So thank you to the library. And before we get started, I want to make sure that I say very clearly that I don't speak for any particular tradition or teacher. So my practice is very much an amalgam. You heard that a little in my bio. I have mixed ancestry, and I have had the good fortune to study with teachers from all over the world. And I'm always studying more. So my work is informed by a lot of different influences and traditions. So this talk is in no way exhaustive of indigenous or spiritual perspectives. I only speak for myself, but hopefully this will be a good introduction or expansion of what you already think about when you think about shamanism. So I really look forward to your questions. But I think we might start with a little meditation just so that we're all sort of arriving here in the same mindset. So you don't have to go anywhere or do anything in particular. You can just be as you are. But just if you like, you can close your eyes and just take a few breaths and just notice how you're feeling. Notice what's up for you right now in your body or in your mind. Just sort of take the temperature of this moment for you. And if you're noticing that you feel a little scattered or ungrounded in particular, you can invite your energy to come back to you. Whatever energy you might have left in different places today, just call it home. And feeling the breath, letting it be exactly as it is. And then expanding your attention to the space that you're in right now and any beings that you might be sharing that space with. So that could be a pet, a houseplant, a fly in the windowsill. Just allowing your attention to extend beyond you to some other life. And offering it a greeting, just a polite nod or hello. And then you can expand your attention a little more to take in the landscape around you. So maybe the property that you're on and that grass, those trees, birds and squirrels, insects. And just extending a little hello or a little blessing to all of those beings as well. And noticing here that you share this space with a much bigger community of other than human life. And just notice how that feels to you. And giving yourself 2 or 3 nice, nourishing breaths, bringing your attention back to your body. And releasing this meditation time, you can open your eyes and come back to us when you're ready. Noticing how you feel now, and if it's any different than when you started. So, shamanism, essentially, is our original way of relating to the world. It's the ancestral paradigm. Before churches, before money, before we had specializations in medicine or psychiatry or religion, we had shamanism. And the shaman, who went by and still does go by many different names in many different cultures, is the person who can interface directly and productively with the energetic side of all things, like the land and the plants and the elements, all of those other than human beings and energies that we share our experience with. So the shamans were and are the conversation holders with these beings. They were the ceremony makers and the ones who have held all of the traditional and mythic and healing wisdom of their culture. Sometimes they were and are healers, spiritual leaders, and sometimes even revolutionaries. And I'm thinking specifically of the Babaylan in the Philippines, but also of many Native American leaders. Because being culture bearers, being the ones who related to community in this bigger sense, is a very big responsibility. And it meant that sometimes, still means that sometimes, a very direct action is necessary in order to preserve a way of life. Shamans are said to enter a trance state or an altered state of consciousness in order to hold these conversations. And so in that way, they go into this trance state at will and then can facilitate change. So shamanism is very grounded in the earth and in community, but it also has this sort of esoteric edge, I suppose. And because it's rooted in community, it's important to remember that you can't be a shaman alone. And again, community in this understanding extends to the non-human or the more than human, plants, animals, minerals, the ancestors, the elements, the microbiome, and also mountains and rivers. So I see the shaman as a diplomat of sorts, because they're better able to talk with everybody, talk with all of those beings, and help the whole community to stay in right relationship with each other. And then that way everybody can thrive. So I mentioned the Babaylan from the Philippines, and that there are different words in different cultures for shaman, right? So how did we end up with the word shaman? Well, there are as many words for shaman as there are languages, and many are still in use despite colonialism. And there are still practitioners in many, many cultures. I'm gonna screen share something for you here. Okay. So there were lots of words for this role within all of the ancient European cultures, from which we get a good deal of our common English language. And with the rise of Christianity, or I suppose more specifically with the dominance of the institutionalized church and its relationships with the wealthy, the pagan ways were considered really unacceptable. There was a big power struggle. And the church fathers and the powers that be manipulated languages over time so that the words for what we call shamanism today ended up with these really terrible connotations. So they were conflated or equated with evil or being slutty, dirty, violent, malicious, foolish, superstitious. And so over time, we stopped using those words, particularly in English. And you can consider that for hundreds of years, to be called a witch was basically a death sentence. So we lost that part of language. And over time, we didn't have the vocabulary or context or frame of reference anymore for what these practices were all about. And then in the 19th century, a few academics, who of course were white and male, went to Mongolia and they saw shamans. And shaman is a Mongolian or Tungusic word that means one who knows or one who sees. And these white guys, in their really adorable white guy way, decided that anything that looked kind of like these shamans must be shamanism. And so that word was adopted, or some might say appropriated, into English because it filled a vacuum that was left by all of that linguistic manipulation. So the word shaman is a word with a lot of baggage. So I sometimes say shamanic healer or shamanic practitioner. I don't object when people say shaman, again, because there's no English equivalent. It's common parlance now. But it is still something that requires some awareness and sensitivity, especially because there are still practicing Mongolian shamans. And I am not that, clearly. So that sort of brings up the question, who can be a shaman outside of Mongolia? So in the West here, we're seeing a lot of programs now at retreat centers and 100 other places, and even online, that supposedly teach you how to be a shaman. So who decides if you've graduated as opposed to just paid for a certificate, right? How do you know that somebody is working directly with spirit? So to unpack that a little bit, I like to compare shamanism to music. Everyone has a right to study and learn and enjoy music. And in fact, everybody probably should, right? If you have any desire at all to take piano lessons or voice lessons, you should absolutely do that. It's only going to enrich your life. But a year of guitar lessons is not going to help you sell out Madison Square Garden, right? Some people have natural gifts and abilities. Some people have callings to become career musicians. Whether they get famous or not, they're always practicing and honing their craft. They can't not do it. But most people are not quite like that, right? And they don't have to be because they're called to other things. But everybody can still be fulfilled and challenged and changed by learning more about music. So in my opinion, studying shamanism is similar, right? We're not all going to be Carnegie Hall level maestros because we don't live in that paradigm. We don't see the world that way here in the West. in traditional cultures, they're always conversing with spirit and nature. And we just don't do that here. But I believe some of us are sort of journeyman healers for this culture. And we're going to spend our lives doing this. We can't not do it. Other people are going to get a lot out of a weekend workshop, and then that'll be it, and that's great. So there's a whole spectrum of ability and willingness and calling. Personally, I believe I fall into that journeyman category. I know I'm not Carnegie Hall level, but I do believe I'm called, and I have spent the last 10 years really devoting myself to building these relationships and building my practice. One question that I've been sitting with lately in my practice is whether or not it's possible to be a wisdom bearer for a culture as new as America. Can we, or do we really have American shamans? The answer that I have today is that we're really still discovering who we are. A teacher and author named Daniel Four has talked about borrowing embers. So he says that our European ancestral fires, meaning our traditions and those relationships, have mostly gone out. And so we're now borrowing an ember from those who have been able to keep their fires going. Mostly that means First Nations cultures. And the point isn't to kick them out and sit at their fire forever, or to steal all of their firewood. The point is to politely bring that ember back to our own hearth to build a fire in our own way and with our own wood. And personally, I think we're still discovering what our own fire needs to be. And we're still in those early stages of borrowing embers. Shifting gears a little bit from the conceptual to the practical and personal. As Georgia mentioned, I do see clients one-on-one for healing work, and some couples also. And that healing work is still an expression of relationship. If you're not in right relationship with your body, or with your ancestors, your work, the land you live on, if you have unresolved trauma and you can't call your energy back to you, then all of that can influence your well-being. And all of it will eventually show up in how you live your life and how you feel and how you are day to day. So a lot of my work is about resolving trauma and helping clients relate to their experiences in a different way. And I'm only really able to do that because of my relationships with the spirits that I work with. I also lead rites of passage, as she mentioned. So I officiate weddings, which I love to do. I also have offered baby blessings and even divorces, because we have all of this ceremony for the start of that relationship, but not always for the end. And so a lot of divorced folks are walking around with a lot of energetic loose ends because they haven't had a ceremony to close the loop. But really, any major change that needs recognition and witnessing is a good reason for a ceremony. I also lead rituals for the changing of seasons, so the solstices and equinoxes. And that encourages our right relationship with the natural cycles. And I teach workshops. Some of you might have been at some of my workshops recently, or at the library in Shamanic journeying. And some other topics that my hope is that they'll bring people into their own experience of right relationship with themselves and with nature and their own allies and spirit guides. I want healing to be accessible to everybody. And to me, that's not about being new age. That's not about superstition. The question that I am most often asked, so I might be anticipating some of you, is how I got here and why this is what I do. When I was about 8 years old, I had what was probably Lyme disease, but that was back in 1985, so nobody knew how to treat it. And so I spent a whole summer convalescing. And I had a lot of what my mother called fever dreams that brought me into contact with the spirits I work with now. So what I thought were hallucinations were actually early conversations with my allies. It was scary at the time, but I understand it now. In addition to that, my mother, before she had her own health crises recently, she was very, very psychic. And she always knew, for instance, when women were pregnant before the women even knew themselves. And she always spoke to whomever was willing about spirituality, astrology, divination, ghosts, crystals, all of it. So I grew up around that. And I've always known that there are mysteries and things that we perceive without evidence. So it was never out of the question for me to think that we could talk with the departed or with a tree or a river. It wasn't a huge leap. And then in 2009, I took my first formal training in shamanism. And I had signed up really on a whim to indulge some curiosity, but when I did the first practice in class, it felt like my head was on fire. And I immediately went into an altered state, into a trance. And I broke out in a sweat, and I remembered how to do things rather than being taught them. So that wasn't something I could ignore. And I found out later that that's what's called a spontaneous initiation. And I have argued with myself here and there over the years about whether I really want to be doing this work, because in some ways it probably would have been easier to go get an office job and take the paid vacation. But I'm always called back to the work, and the things show up when I need them in order to stay on this path. So I'm committed to doing this, even though it can be weird and difficult sometimes. And since then, since 2009, I've had the good fortune to study with some amazing teachers from around the world, notably Peru, Mexico, Burkina Faso, Tibet, and some native North American tradition, and also a little bit of Celtic and Scandinavian, and more recently Filipino tradition, and that's all from my ancestry. And so again, my work is very much my own, very American in a way, and informed by all of those other people and practices, all of those borrowed embers. But it's also rooted very simply in my experience and life as a 21st century woman. It's important to note, speaking of community again, that the community decides if a shaman is doing good work. Because I can call myself a healer all day, but if my clients don't have good results, then I'm not a healer. That's very simple. So I'm honored and I'm really grateful to the community and to those who have entrusted me with their time and energy and relationship. Shamanic healing is the oldest healing system that we have, and it has survived all of these eons because it works, because there is something here that works for us. And it works not just on the personal level, but I keep thinking about the ripple effect. And this understanding of relationship and community and right relationships specifically, and how that can ripple out into how we treat each other and how we treat the planet and all of the other than humans that we share life with. So I think it's amazing that so many people are interested in shamanism right now. I think it's a really positive sign that we're looking for something that feels spiritually authentic and that gives us an experience of real connection. And it shows that we're acknowledging, I think, some of our loneliness and our need for community, for our ancestors, our allies in nature. And we're acknowledging too our need for healing. So I hope that we can continue that search through shamanism in a respectful and a humble way. And I hope that we can tend our embers really well and build good fires so that everybody can stay warm. So I want to leave space here now for your questions. I thank you for listening to me. So you can, I think, maybe raise your hand on one of the buttons down below, and Georgia will see you, or you can type a question in the chat box.
We did have one. So we do have one question in the chat already. I'll just read it from it's someone's iPad. Okay, so do you do work? I think they mean to say with a medicine wheel. If so, can you talk about that and how to use the wheel?
I have done some medicine wheel practices, but it isn't a part of my my personal work generally. It's oftentimes thought of as a Native American tradition, I think. My understanding of medicine wheel is that at each direction, we're working with a particular intention, a particular prayer. And so you move your way through the wheel as a way to come to some completion with that intention. But I think there are different formats for doing that. I know my partner right now is working on one that's Irish and Celtic based. Yeah, I open the directions a lot, so I'm thinking about that sort of orientation. But I can't say too much more about direct practice. It's not something that I've spent a lot of time with. Thanks for the question.
Okay, and then we have another one. Someone said, how do you deal with evil spirits?
Well, it depends. I'll say in a really general way that I try to do it compassionately. One of my teachers actually uses the phrase compassionate depossession, but it can be applied broadly, sort of outside of just that context. There's an understanding that while some energies are not helpful and we don't want them around, that we want to approach them still with some compassion and some understanding that they have a need, right? That they're misbehaving because something is unmet or unresolved for them. So, and sometimes it's not evil specifically. Sometimes it's an ancestor who's trying to get attention, or sometimes there is a disruption in the land, and so we feel that in the house. So it's very often that there's a question or a need or something that energy is trying to accomplish. So my approach is usually to call out the bad behavior and set boundaries, but also to try to meet the need or try to comfort them as I'm escorting them away. So yeah, so I don't believe really in the notion of like battling them. It's a much gentler, but still very effective and direct approach.
Okay, great. So the next one is, how have you cultivated the ability to connect with spirits, allies, guidance, etc.?
Hi, Fareshta. How have I done that? Well, it really began with Buddhist meditation practice. Before I knew that this was going to be my path directly, I found a lot of value in in mindfulness and in being aware of my body and my breath and what, the crazy activity in my brain was, and, sort of detaching a little bit from that. And that was sort of early practice in getting out of my own way. Yoga also helped in a similar way. And then just lots and lots of journeying. Lots and lots of journeying. So journeying is a meditation with a drum, and the rhythm of the drum helps entrain your brain waves and actually helps you shift into a deeper meditation. Lots and lots and lots of that for the past 15 years. It gets easier, just like anything else does over time. Yeah, so those are the two main ways. It's a lot about trust and surrender, which is such a tough thing. It's such a tough thing to practice with, but I think I've relaxed into second guessing it less, and just allowing the information and the communication to come through.
Okay, great. The next question is, what does a typical healing session involve?
That's a great question. In terms of the form of a healing session, whether we're meeting in person or virtually, which is how most of it's gone lately, we'll talk for a little while about what's going on. What made you reach out? What's up in your life that you feel like this is going to be supportive? And I set up my mesa, my healing tools, and get out my drum. And I offer some invocation and some blessing and prayer for our time together. And I might ask some clarifying questions about your intention. And it's not so much because I need to hear the whole story and all of the details. It's so that I can be much more focused. So I want to be like a laser. I want to be really precise about how I'm assisting you if I can. And I'm always checking in, right? I'm already kind of in that trance state, so I'm able to have a conversation with my allies and also sometimes with yours, with the clients. Once we're done talking, there's the session proper, really. There's the healing work. And it could use any one of a number of techniques depending on what the situation is. I might journey with you. I might do really direct energy work. Might remove energy that's heavy, that's not working for you. I might be able to call some of your energy back to you if you've lost it along the way, particularly in traumatic circumstances. Or I might be able to help you find some new affirmations, some new perspective and insight on what's going on. Then we close and chat a little bit. There's usually some sharing or some questions after. And I always assign homework because it's really, really important that you continue the integration process on your own. I don't want people to rely on me. I don't want them to keep coming back to me for the same issue. So the hope is that I'll give you something to do actively over time that will help you anchor in the work that we've done. And I usually check in on people a couple days later to see how they're doing. So again, it really depends on specifically what's up and what your issue is, but that's the basic format for a session.
Okay, the next question, and you might have touched on this a little bit, but what tools do you use, sage or music?
So I do have a medicine bundle called a mesa, which is a Caro style bundle from Peru. Some stones, rattles. I have what's called a tumi, which is like a ceremonial knife. It's really dull. Nobody ever, it's not a danger anyway, but it's helpful sometimes for cutting away energetic cords or habits, things like that, heavy energies. So I use a lot of the things that are in my mesa frequently. The rattle is very important. The rattle is, I also make rattles. Um, rattle is, in a way, sort of like energetic Brillo pad or sandpaper. So it helps to really clear a lot of energy away from the body. And it's also filled with seeds. So it's this sort of waking up of intention and potential. The drum and the rattle, also the rhythm is very important, again, in this way that it helps entrain our brainwaves and help us drop in. I sing medicine songs, so in that way, music, I guess. Medicine songs are ikaros. It's prayer that's transmitted that way. What other tools do I use? Yeah, sage and Palo Santo and things like that. I try to be very respectful in how I use them because they're sacred plants, and Palo Santo in particular is endangered. But I will use cedar smoke clearing, sometimes mugwort, some local plants that are more common. So yeah, those are most of my tools.
Okay, the next question. Can you share what drumming does for the body and soul during a session?
Hmm. Well, my drum is a medicine drum, is a spirit drum. So it has its own personality and its own medicine that she brings, female. But again, this consistent rhythm is, I forget exactly which brainwaves. I think it changes us from alpha to delta or something like that. So even though we're awake, our brainwaves are behaving as though we are in a dream. So it can be incredibly relaxing. We drop really deeply into that state where we can access more of our intuition. So when I do it, it helps me have a much clearer conversation. And oftentimes clients will just zone out, or they'll discover some of their own insight. Um, yeah, and you might find in your own practices, if you aren't engaging in shamanism, chanting, dancing, there are other ways to bring that rhythm and repetition in. Beads, right? Working with a mala or a rosary, it's the same principle.
Okay, the next question, and this is a question I had actually. How can shamans, shamanic healers, practitioners, etc., help send healing to the world at this time?
Hi, Liz. Um, I think, ceremony, holding a lot of ceremony, um, on our own, it seems to be, what we're able to do right now. But in the early days of our quarantine, I did a Zoom with my teachers in Peru with like 400 other people from around the world, and so we were all making prayers at the same time with them. And it was beautiful, I think, not just for the energy of that moment, and the whatever alchemy was happening in the ceremony, but I think it was important also for us all to feel that sense of solidarity and community. So I think practitioners right now, the more we can, if we're called to, some people might be called to be hermits right now and do a lot of inner work, but as we're called to, I think it's very important for us to continue to gather in whatever ways we can, recognize the importance of our community, and really show up with honesty and with compassion, and with a sense of potential and hope. There's so much out there that is so defeating and distracting, and I think shamanic practitioners, we're in a special position to see through that and to understand that it's not the whole truth. So I hope more and more of us are showing up with more of the truth to say yes, and we're still connected, and we can still make ceremony, and we can still pray. It's a great question, Liz. Thank you.
Okay, and the next question, do you know of any ayahuasca retreats in New York, and how do you feel about this?
That's the second most common question. It's about ayahuasca. I do not know of ayahuasca retreats in New York. It's been several years since I partook. So I don't have existing connections now. I'll say really generally that I am a stickler for protocol. I'm a stickler for politeness and humbleness. And there are a lot of people right now who are being very cavalier about plant medicine ceremony. And in addition to that, just being in some cases impolite, I think it can also be dangerous. So my encouragement always, my advice to folks when they're interested in plant medicine, especially ayahuasca, is to make sure that the person that you are sitting with is very respectful, very well trained, that they've spoken at length with you, that they're doing due diligence to make sure that you're going to be safe. They should be talking to you about medications you're on. They should be talking to you about a diet before you go into ceremony. And if they're not doing that, then I would say find someone else to sit with. It's a very big deal. And it can be life-changingly beautiful, miraculous, incredible. It can also be incredibly intense. So to have a really safe container and someone who's leading you, who knows what they're doing, is really, really important. So if you feel called to be there and you have that safety, then good journeys, and I will see you on the other side.
Okay, so the next question, do you take on students, or is there somewhere you would recommend for someone to learn more?
Well, I mean, I always have some workshops and retreats and things going on. I do not currently take on students to teach healing work. I haven't yet felt called. If a whole bunch of people ask me, that might change. But it's a big responsibility that I'm still feeling into. So that hasn't happened yet. But you know, again, like situations like this, I teach journey, the Moon IQ rites, grief. I do a lot of work around grief. So people are always welcome to come and join for those things. Where would I recommend someone learn more? There are a lot of resources. I can tell you my teachers, because I can vouch for them personally, are Ray Christ from the Jaguar Path, Daniel Four, who I mentioned with the embers, sharing embers. He has some online programming and also a book. I have a teacher, Rob Murphy. I don't know what he's teaching right now. Who else is teaching? Oh, the Power Path. I haven't trained with them, but one of my dear colleague friends has. So the Power Path I recommend as well. Yeah, and I mean, if you want a reading list or something like that, I can give you that too. Just email me anytime and I'll put something together.
And someone else said, sorry, I got taken away from it. Okay, are there other plant medicines you find helpful?
Yes, I work with cacao a lot, with chocolate, and that's another sort of workshop or gathering that I've led. I use ceremonial grade cacao, so it's not like a Hershey bar. It's as much a whole food heirloom variety, single origin, really beautiful, beautiful heart-opening medicine that's accessible to everybody. And otherwise, really the medicine I have the most experience with is peyote, through Native American church ceremony, and also huichol, Huijarika, Native Mexican ceremony. Really just extraordinarily beautiful and masterful ceremony. I mean, aside from the medicine, the container is incredible. I learned something just by showing up and watching the leaders hold that space. Really extraordinary. Yeah, plant medicine's not for everybody. In my book, I have a whole chapter that's titled "Plant Medicines Are Not for Everybody." But if you find yourself moving in that direction, buckle up, get ready to do some deep work and some really extraordinary prayer. Yeah.
Okay, someone said, and you probably can just put this in the chat maybe at the end, but someone said, how can we sign up for your events, / your email address?
Sure. Well, my website is here, and I'm on social media. And in fact, here I can show you this. Well, no, I won't do that. On Instagram, Mickey.Beloy. And there is a Facebook. That, yeah. And I do have a few things coming up. On Facebook Live, I'm going to be doing a summer solstice ritual over the weekend. So just show up with a candle on Saturday at 5 o'clock to Facebook Live. And we, in lieu of a big fire ceremony, we can spend some time together that way. And then I have a grief gathering, and I've been doing these for the past few months. And that's coming up on the 23rd, I believe, the Tuesday. And that's an opportunity for us to let our guards down and just be honest and kind and bear witness to each other. There's been a lot of loss of all different kinds, certainly bereavement, but disappointment, a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear, disillusionment. So it's a space to just sort of sit with that in a way that can be productive and connective. So that's coming up, and everyone is welcome to that as well. Yeah, July 25th, I'm doing a book reading out in Connecticut. So we're slowly getting back the momentum of the very busy workshop calendar that wasn't because of the virus. Yeah.
Okay, so we don't have any more questions in the chat, but I actually have a question. And you might have mentioned this already, or it might just be obvious, but so, does the work that you do involve a lot of physical touch with the people that you work with?
It doesn't have to. So if I have a client in person, and I have their consent, I always ask first. Then there is some touch, which really is more to keep us oriented to each other, so they know where I am and where I'm working. But I do sessions virtually as well, and they're just as effective. We're working with energy and with intention. Your intention, our collective energy, the energy of our allies, the energy of the earth, is all sort of coalescing in this moment of healing. So that doesn't necessarily have to include hands-on at all. It's interesting, I just did the Munaki rites, which are blessings from Peru, And I had given the first half of the blessings just before quarantine. And so people were owed these last 5 blessings in the series. And so we were able to gather in the space, social distanced, all 6 feet apart, and I gave the rites from 3 feet away from each person, masks on. And it was really powerful and lovely. So the touch is not required.
Okay, so we have her for a few more minutes. So if anybody else has any more questions, you can just put them in the chat. And then I also have one more question while we wait, see if anybody else wants to ask anything. So how do you feel about, like, do you find that you're doing, um, do you find that that is just as effective or helpful to people as like an individual session?
Georgia, you broke up. Could you repeat the question, please?
Oh, I said, do you find that, doing groups is more effective than doing like a one-on-one session, or just as effective when it comes to things like grief?
Mm. That's a wonderful question. If someone is coming to me with an acute personal issue, if they're coming to me because they were in a car accident or something like that, and they're still feeling really shaken up, then that's really a one-on-one session is gonna be more productive, because we can really dive into that issue and give them, they have 100% of my attention, and all of the work is focused on them. But there are situations, as like you mentioned, the grief, where really community is everything, and to be able to work with each other and witness each other and have all of that energy be collectivized and magnetized, to know that there's 5, 10, 15 different conversations that that you could have with this shared context and this shared language, like that's invaluable. And it's, I try always to make those group spaces really safe and really authentic, so that people can show up as their whole selves, and hopefully be unself-conscious, maybe in the only safe space in their lives. They might not have other ways that they can do that. So they're both equally valuable, but I think it just depends on what you need in the moment and the kind of support that's going to serve you the best.
Thank you. Okay, so we have one more question. Hi, Mickey. How do you keep your own energy healing? Do you have a morning routine or ritual, actually, for example? Thank you.
Yeah. Hi there. Keep my own energy healthy. Well, boundaries are super, super, super important. So yeah, that was a lesson I learned sort of the hard way in the early days of my practice, was not being afraid to say no, not being afraid to say, I think that's beyond my pay grade, and being able to say, I don't think I'm your healer, and to not let that, to not take it personally if there was someone that I really wasn't connecting with in a good way. My teacher used to call that leaking, right? We leak our energy out to other people. So I've learned over the years to try to plug up all my leaks and not get over invested in places where I can't really be helpful or supportive. So that's one thing. I do have my own practices, my own rituals. I keep an altar, and I check in with it most days. There are a few prayers that I say every day. They're short, so I can make sure I fit them in all the time. I tend to do better with bite size. It's much easier for me to maintain the bite size stuff than to take on huge practices and get 5 or 6 days in and then forget. yeah, and I ask for help. I ask for support from my allies in spirit. I ask them to help remove anything that's not mine or that isn't helpful every day. I take ritual baths from time to time with that in mind as well. So it's, there is like an energy hygiene, I guess, that has become just part of life. Um, yeah, but otherwise I try not to think too hard about other people's stuff. I try not to read too much into the drama and the heaviness, and if I'm going to pick up anybody's juju, or I try not to give it any attention, because I feel like then it gets attracted more. Yeah. Thanks for the question. That's good.
Okay, so our time is basically up. So if anybody has any other questions, Mickey did put her contact information in the chat, or you can just, if you did not catch that, you can always just contact us at the library. We have her information. Oh, there we go. Perfect. Okay, everybody look at your screen. So yeah, so we could leave this up for a couple of minutes if people want to just get this down. Wow, that was great. Thank you so much, Mickey. I really, really appreciate that.
Yes, and everything right now is sliding scale as well. So um, if you are interested in following up with me in any way, just know that there's flexibility there in light of our circumstances.
I just want to thank you, Mickey. Thank you, Georgia and the Nyack Library. They rock. Thank you. You're exactly what I needed. I can't even tell you the kind of day I had, what I'm feeling inside prior to this, and so you've already done some healing, and I thank you for it. I'll be in touch.
Oh, thank you, Tom.
I agree.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, so yeah, thank you everybody, and I hope everyone has a nice night. And Mickey, thank you again, really and truly.
Thank
Just
you. Thank
getting
you.
to listen to your voice for the past hour has been great.
Yes.
Well,
Thank
it's my
you so
pleasure.
much.
I will see you all again. Be well. Be safe.
You too.
Thank you so much.
Bye, ladies. Be well.